The microphone screeched through the convention center, and 400 heads swiveled toward the demonstration stage. Harrison Crane stood in the center of the blue mats, a man carved out of privilege and polished by decades of disciplined movement. His white gi was immaculate, his black belt so worn it gleamed like charcoal satin. He had just tossed a volunteer across the floor with a wrist lock so smooth that the man's feet left the ground before his brain registered the fall. The applause was automatic, a wave of clapping that the billionaire accepted with a tiny, rehearsed bow. Then he scanned the crowd again. "Who else?" he called into the wireless headset. $10,000 to anyone who can put me on my back in a friendly spar. That's pocket change, I know, but it's also a chance to touch greatness. Any takers?" A few men laughed nervously. Most had already seen what happened to the 3 gym owners, 2 karate instructors, and 1 overly enthusiastic kickboxer who had climbed onto the stage in the last 40 minutes. All of them had been redirected into the mat with a gentle but irresistible force, the kind that left egos bruised and wrists tingling. Near the back of the standing crowd, behind a barrier of folding chairs, a little girl in a purple hoodie tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why does he keep calling people up just to throw them?" Alex Torres didn't answer right away. He was too busy calculating how long they could stay before the parking meter ran out. The convention center's weekend expo had been Lily's idea. She had seen the flyer at school: martial arts demonstrations, fitness challenges, a bounce house in the far hall, and she had looked at him with that quiet hope that always made his chest hurt. Money was tighter than a clenched fist, but he'd found $10 for parking and another $8 for 2 hot dogs they would split. That was the budget. That was the whole day. He was not the kind of man people noticed. His jacket was clean but faded at the elbows, a dark green work coat that had seen too many early mornings. His boots were steel-toed but scuffed white at the edges. He had the kind of build that suggested strength, but not the kind that demanded attention: broad shoulders softened by a father's perpetual exhaustion, hands that were calloused but gentle when they rested on his daughter's shoulder. His face was unremarkable at a glance, the face of a man who had been ground down just enough to become invisible in a crowd, which was exactly how he preferred it. "It's just for show, Mija," he said softly. "Rich people games." Harrison Crane's eyes had a hawk's instinct for the one person in the room who wasn't looking at him. That was the man he spotted. "You," Crane said, pointing past the shoulders of 2 security guards. "The gentleman in the green jacket, you look like you've worked a day in your life. Come on up." Alex's stomach dropped. Beside him, Lily froze. She was 10 years old, with her mother's dark curls and a seriousness that made strangers think she was older than she was. She looked up at her father with wide eyes. "I'm good," Alex called back, his voice even. He didn't smile. He just shook his head once. Crane's smile widened. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had never been told no by anyone he considered an equal. "Come on, friend, I'm 62 years old. You're what, 40? You're not scared of a grandfather, are you?" A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the audience. Someone nearby muttered, "Just do it, man." A phone was raised to record. Alex felt the familiar press of attention, the weight of eyes turning him from a shadow into a target. He could feel Lily's fingers tightening on his sleeve. "I don't train anymore," he said, quieter this time, hoping that would end it. But Crane had a microphone, and a microphone has no interest in quiet endings. "Anymore," he repeated, drawing the word out. "Oh, so you used to train? What was it, a little karate in the community center? T-bow in the 90s. The audience laughed, and Crane basked in it. He gestured magnanimously at the stage. "I'll go easy. I promise not to hurt you. Come on, let the little girl see her dad be brave." That was the line that changed things. Lily's jaw tightened. She was a child who had learned to read cruelty early, because cruelty had visited her family and left a permanent scar. She saw the way the rich man's eyes flicked to her, the way he used her presence as a lever. She looked up at her father, and in that look was a question that had nothing to do with fear. Alex exhaled slowly. He had spent 6 years building a life of quiet invisibility, a life where no one asked questions, where the past stayed buried under parent-teacher conferences and grocery lists and double shifts. He was a single father. He was a maintenance worker at a middle school. He was nobody. And he had made his peace with being nobody, because being somebody once had cost him almost everything. But he was also a man who could not stomach a bully. He leaned down and whispered something in Lily's ear. Her eyes went wide, then calm. She nodded. Alex straightened up, unzipped his work jacket, and handed it to his daughter. Underneath, he wore a plain gray t-shirt, faded and soft with age. The crowd parted as he walked forward, and the murmur of their voices was a low, curious hum. He stepped onto the mats with the unhurried calm of a man who had walked onto far more dangerous surfaces a long, long time ago. Crane clapped his hands together. There we go. What's your name, sir? Alex. Alex, excellent. Alex, have you ever practiced Aikido? No. Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, any grappling art? Alex tilted his head slightly. A little. Crane's grin sharpened. A little, I love that. Every man who's ever watched a YouTube video has a little training. He gestured for an assistant to bring a second gi top. You want a uniform? Mouth guard? I'm fine. Right, the rules are simple. We start standing. If you can take me down or make me submit, you win the $10,000. He paused for effect, scanning the audience. And the priceless story of having beaten an 8th Dan Aikido master, which I should add has never happened in an exhibition match. So no pressure. Alex stepped onto the center of the mat. He was a few inches shorter than Crane, and his posture was relaxed in a way that could be mistaken for defeat. He didn't bounce on his toes. He didn't crack his neck or shake out his limbs. He just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes on Crane's chest rather than his face. Before we start, Alex said, and his voice carried clearly even without a microphone, I have one condition. Crane raised an eyebrow. Oh, let's hear it. Alex looked at him, and for the first time, a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a mocking smile. It wasn't arrogant. It was the smile of a man who knew something the rest of the room didn't, and who had decided, after a great deal of patience, to share it, only if you promise not to cry. Silence that followed was so complete that the buzz of the fluorescent lights became the loudest sound in the room. Someone in the front row choked on a gasp. The assistant with the microphone fumbled it. Harrison Crane's smile froze, then slowly melted into something colder. That's cute, Crane said, and his voice had lost its performative warmth. You'll forgive me if I've heard that before. Alex didn't reply. He simply raised his hands to a neutral guard position, not the high, tight guard of a boxer, not the extended hands of an aikidoka, but something relaxed and open, palms facing inward. Crane's eyes narrowed. He had seen enough martial arts to know when someone was comfortable, and this man, this anonymous nobody in a faded t-shirt, was very, very comfortable. The referee, a young man with a whistle, looked between them nervously. Bow, he said. Crane bowed with the crisp precision of decades of ritual. Alex inclined his head, a small gesture that was perfectly respectful but utterly lacking in ceremony. Begin. Crane moved first, as he always did. His footwork was beautiful, a gliding entry that closed the distance without seeming to cross it. His right hand darted toward Alex's left wrist, his left hand already rising to control the elbow, the classic Aikido entry for Kotegishi, the wrist return throw that had planted a dozen challengers on the mat that day. His fingers closed around Alex's wrist, and then Alex's wrist wasn't there anymore. It was a small movement, so small that the audience didn't register it. Alex simply rotated his hand palm up and slid it through the gap between Crane's thumb and fingers, a release so fluid it looked like water slipping through a net. Crane's grip, which had been absolute a heartbeat before, closed on empty air. Crane's eyes widened. He adjusted instantly, stepping deeper to catch the elbow, but Alex had already pivoted. Not fast, not explosive, just early. He moved to the outside angle as if he had known exactly where Crane would be before Crane himself knew. His left hand tapped Crane's hip, a touch so light it could have been a friendly pat. A less experienced observer might have thought it was accidental contact. Crane knew better. That tap was a marker. It said, I am here. You are open. The billionaire reset, circling. The audience, which had expected another effortless throw, shifted uneasily. Something was different. The air had changed. Lucky slip, Crane said, but his voice was tighter now. He advanced again, this time with a two-handed grab for the collar and sleeve, setting up Iraminage, the entering body throw that was his specialty. He caught the fabric of Alex's sleeve and collar, planted his pivot foot, and turned his hips to execute the throw. And Alex went with him, not resisting, not fighting, simply stepping in, so close that their chests almost touched, neutralizing the angle of the throw before it could generate power. It was a principle so fundamental that white belts learned it in their first week of judo, but the timing required to apply it against an 8th Dan master mid-technique was a kind of genius. Crane, suddenly tangled in his own momentum, tried to adjust, but Alex's right leg had already hooked behind his, and Alex's right arm had already wrapped across his chest. A whisper of weight shift, a gentle pull, and Crane's balance dissolved. He fell, not hard, not violently. Alex guided him down with one hand cradling the back of his head, lowering him to the mat as if laying a child into bed. But he fell, and his back touched the blue vinyl with a soft, unmistakable thud. The crowd erupted, phones flew higher. The referee's whistle shrieked, but no one heard it. Crane lay on his back for one stunned second, staring at the ceiling, before rolling to his feet with a speed that belied his age. His face was flushed, but whether from exertion or embarrassment, it was impossible to tell. "That wasn't a takedown," he said, brushing his gi. "That was a trip, a lucky trip." Alex stood exactly where he had been, hands loose at his sides again. He was not even breathing heavily. "You want to go again?" The question was genuine. There was no mockery in it, which somehow made it worse. Crane's jaw worked. "Best of 3, he said to the referee, as if it had always been the plan. The referee looked at Alex, who shrugged. "Fine with me." The second round lasted 11 seconds. Crane, having tasted the mat, abandoned his elegant entries and came forward with a more aggressive combination, a wrist grab into Shihanage, the 4-direction throw. It was a technique that could break bones if applied with force. He drove forward with real intent now, the kind of speed that had earned him his rank decades ago in Japan under masters who did not suffer ego lightly. He seized Alex's wrist, twisted, and stepped under the arm to lever the shoulder, but Alex had already anticipated the grip. As Crane twisted, Alex relaxed his entire arm into a deadweight state, then spiraled his body downward, dropping his center of gravity below Crane's point of control. It was a principle from a different art entirely, one that treated the human body not as a collection of levers, but as a continuous, connected chain. Crane, suddenly holding a weight he hadn't expected, overcommitted to the throw. Alex accepted the momentum and redirected it, rolling through a forward somersault and coming up behind Crane. In the space of a breath, Alex's arms wrapped around Crane's waist, his hip connected to the back of Crane's thigh, and a gentle lifting motion sent the billionaire's feet skyward. It was a mat return so clean it could have been a demonstration video. Crane landed flat on his back, the air leaving his lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. This time the crowd's roar had a different quality. It wasn't just surprise, it was awe. The phone cameras were everywhere now, and somewhere in the back a man was shouting, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" Alex released Crane immediately and stepped back to give him space. He did not raise his hands in victory. He did not look at the audience. He just waited, patient as stone. Crane got up slowly. His eyes were wet at the corners, though whether from the impact or something else, no one could say. He looked at Alex with an expression that had shed all its performance. Underneath the bravado was something raw, something that looked a lot like humiliation, but also strangely like hunger. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, and his voice cracked. Alex didn't answer. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Alex said. "Just a dad." The tremor in Crane's voice had opened a door, and the audience, now completely invested, began to murmur. The referee called the match. Alex had won. $10,000 was his if he wanted it. The assistant approached with a clipboard, ready to take down his information, but Alex held up a hand. He walked to the edge of the mat, where Lily was standing with his jacket clutched against her chest. Her face was a mixture of shock and fierce, bright pride. He crouched down to her level. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes shining. "Daddy, how did you do that?" He brushed a curl away from her face. "I'll tell you later. Right now I think we should go." Crane's voice stopped him. "Wait." Alex turned. The billionaire was standing in the center of the mat, his perfect gi now wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked less like a master and more like a man who had just been handed a truth he didn't know what to do with. "You said a little," Crane said, almost to himself. "You said you don't train anymore." "I don't," Alex said. "Then how?" Silence stretched between them. The entire convention hall seemed to hold its breath. Alex looked at his daughter, then back at Crane, and for the first time his expression softened into something like compassion. "I used to do a different kind of work," he said quietly. "A long time ago." Didn't elaborate, but something in the way he said it made Crane's face change. The billionaire was a student of movement, and he had just been moved in ways he didn't fully understand. He had seen the precision, the economy, the utter lack of wasted motion. That was not a little training. That was not even a lifetime of training. That was something else entirely. "Will you at least tell me your full name?" Crane asked. Alex considered it. "Tors, Alex Tors." Crane repeated it under his breath as if memorizing it. Then he did something no one in the audience expected. He bowed deeply from the waist and held the bow for 3 full seconds. "Thank you for the lesson," he said, and his voice was thick. "I have not been thrown like that in 30 years. Alex nodded, a small, dignified acknowledgement. "You've got good technique." But you stopped learning a long time ago, I think. It was not said as an insult. It was said as an observation, the kind of honest feedback that a true teacher gives. Crane received it with his head bowed, and when he straightened up, the arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked remarkably like gratitude. I'd like to talk more, Crane said. Not here if you're willing. Alex looked at Lily. She was watching him with an intensity that made his heart ache. He knew that look. It was the look of a child realizing her father was more than she had ever known, a mystery she had lived beside her whole life without understanding. Maybe, Alex said, but right now, I need to get my daughter lunch. He took Lily's hand, and they walked out of the exhibition hall together. The crowd parted for them, and the murmur of voices followed them like a wake. They ate their hot dogs on a bench outside the convention center, overlooking a small artificial pond where ducks paddled in lazy circles. Lily was uncharacteristically quiet for the first few minutes, chewing her food with the mechanical focus of a child deep in thought. Finally, she set her hot dog down. Daddy, were you a spy? Alex choked on a bite of bun. What? No. Ninja, Lily. Then what? Because that man was supposed to be a master, and you threw him like he was nothing. Wiped his mouth with a paper napkin and stared at the pond. The ducks quacked at each other, oblivious to the weight of the question. He had known this day would come eventually. He had hoped it wouldn't come until she was older, until he had the right words, until the memories had faded enough that he could speak about them without feeling the old ghost stir. But life doesn't wait for the right words. I used to be in the military, he said, a long time before you were born. I worked with a unit that specialized in close-quarters situations. I trained in a lot of different things, combatives, grappling, how to move and how to stay calm when things were very, very not calm. Lily's eyes were round. Like a soldier, something like that. You fight in wars, he nodded slowly. Yes, I did things I'm not proud of, and I saw things I wish I could forget. But I also learned things about the human body, about how to control it and how to protect it. He paused. About when not to use what I know. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said very seriously, is that why you never talk about it? Yes, because I didn't want you to ever think that fighting is what makes a person strong. The strongest thing I ever did was walk away from that life. He reached over and took her hand. When your mom got sick, I left. I came home. And I promised myself I would never raise my hand against another person unless there was absolutely no other choice. Today that man, he was bullying people. He thought he was untouchable, and maybe I could have just walked away. But the way he looked at you, his voice tightened. I didn't like it, so I made a choice. Lily squeezed his hand. You weren't mean to him even after. No, because he's not a bad person. He's just a person who forgot what it feels like to be challenged. I think I reminded him. Alex smiled, a tired but genuine smile. And now I'm going to have to explain to my boss why I'm all over the internet. Lily giggled. The sound was bright and clear, and it cut through the heaviness like a sunbeam through. Days later, a black sedan pulled up in front of Alex's apartment building. The neighborhood was modest, a row of agging fourplexes with dusty cars in the driveways and children's bicycles chained to porch railings. Alex was sitting on the front steps, watching Lily draw chalk flowers on the sidewalk when the rear door opened and Harrison Crane stepped out. He was dressed in casual clothes, slacks and a polo shirt, and he looked smaller without the gi, more human. He approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. Mr. Torres, he said, I hope I'm not intruding. Alex stood up, brushing off his jeans. You found me. It wasn't hard, you're famous now. The video has 6 million views. Crane's smile was rueful. My publicist is furious. My grandkids think it's hilarious. Lily looked up from her chalk, and Crane gave her a small, awkward wave. She waved back cautiously. I came to apologize, Crane said. Properly. What I did at the expo, the way I called you out, the way I mentioned your daughter, it was beneath me. I was performing for a crowd, and I forgot that the people I call up onto that stage are real human beings with real lives. You taught me a lesson that day, and the least I can do is admit I needed to learn it. Alex studied him for a moment. The words were good, but words were easy. What he was looking for was the thing behind the words, and he saw it in the way Crane's shoulders were set, not in a performance of humility, but in a genuine, weary recognition of his own failure. Apology accepted, Alex said. Crane nodded, visibly relieved. I also came to ask you something, not as a challenge, as a request. Paused. I've been practicing martial arts for over 50 years. I have black belts in 4 styles, and I'm the highest-ranked non-Japanese practitioner of my Aikido lineage. And in 11 seconds, you showed me a dimension of movement I didn't know existed. I've rewatched the video 100 times. Your timing, your positioning, your ability to read my weight shifts, it's extraordinary. I want to learn. Alex folded his arms. Learn what? Whatever you're willing to teach. Principles, concepts. I don't need belts or ceremonies, I just want to understand. Crane hesitated, then said, I'm aware that I have nothing you need. You didn't even take the $10,000, but I'm asking anyway. The afternoon sun was warm on the sidewalk. Lily had stopped drawing and was openly listening now, her chalk forgotten. Alex looked at his daughter, then back at the billionaire. Why do you want to learn? He asked. Crane was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had a roughness that hadn't been there before. Because I built an empire by being the smartest man in every room, and that kind of success makes you deaf. You stop hearing the things you don't want to hear. My wife left me 3 years ago. My children call on birthdays and holidays. My students bow to me, but none of them will tell me the truth. And a few days ago, a man in a faded t-shirt looked at me and said I'd stopped learning. He was right. He swallowed. I don't want to die being the man I was on that stage. Alex exhaled, a long, slow release of breath. He turned to Lily. What do you think, Mija? Should I teach him? Lily considered the question with the gravity of a 10-year-old who had seen more of life than most. Is he going to cry again? Crane let out a startled laugh. Probably, but I promise it'll be the good kind of crying. Lily looked at her father and nodded. Okay, but you have to be nice. Always nice, Alex said, and the corner of his mouth twitched. He looked at Crane. Saturday mornings, the community center on 4th Street, 8 o'clock. Wear comfortable clothes and leave your rank at the door. Crane's face broke into a smile, a real one this time, the smile of a man who had been handed a gift he didn't deserve. I'll be there. Saturday morning came, and Crane was there, in sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt, standing on the scuffed hardwood floor of the community center gym. The room smelled of old sweat and floor wax. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. There was no audience, no cameras, no money, just 2 men and a little girl sitting in the corner with a coloring book. Alex began the lesson not with techniques, but with a conversation. The first thing you need to understand, he said, is that everything you know about martial arts is based on resisting force with force. Aikido tries to avoid that, but it still relies on controlling the opponent's structure. What I learned was different. It's not about control. It's about connection. Your body is a sensory instrument. You don't need to dominate the other person's movement. You just need to feel it earlier than they feel yours. Crane listened, and for the first time in decades, he was a beginner again. They worked on simple drills, pushing hands, sensitivity exercises, the kind of foundational work that most masters considered beneath them. Crane's coordination was excellent, but his ego kept getting in the way. Every time he tried to force a movement, Alex would gently redirect and let him stumble. Every time he tensed up, Alex would touch the tense muscle and say, "Let that go, it's not helping you." An hour, Crane was dripping sweat and grinning like a fool. I haven't felt this incompetent since I was a white belt, he said, and there was joy in his voice. Good, Alex said. Incompetence is where learning starts. The Saturday sessions became a regular thing. Crane's car, which had looked so out of place the first week, became a familiar sight in the neighborhood. People stopped gawking. The billionaire who had once thrown challenges around for sport now spent his weekends trying, and often failing, to understand principles that a maintenance worker explained in simple, patient language, and somewhere along the way, a friendship formed. Not the kind built on mutual benefit or social strategy, the kind built on honesty. Crane learned about Sarah, Alex's late wife, and the long battle with cancer that had drained their savings and their spirit. Alex learned about the loneliness that lived behind Crane's fortune, the empty rooms of a mansion too large for one man. Lily became the unofficial mascot of their training sessions. She would watch for a while, then wander off to play, but occasionally she'd walk over and correct Crane's posture with all the authority of a tiny drill sergeant. "Your shoulders are too high," she'd say. "Daddy says tension is the enemy." And Crane would bow and say, "Thank you, sensei," and mean it. 6 months later, Crane asked Alex to come to his dojo, the private training hall where he taught his advanced students. Alex went with Lily in tow, and for the first time the students saw the man who had thrown their master on that famous video. Crane asked Alex to teach a class. Alex refused at first, uncomfortable with the formality, the rows of students in crisp white gis. But Crane insisted. "They need to hear what you have to say, not techniques, principles, the stuff that matters." Alex stood in front of 30 black belts and told them the truth. "I'm not a master," he said. "I don't have a rank, I don't have a title. What I have is experience, and most of it came from places I hope you never have to see. But the most important thing I learned isn't how to fight. It's when not to, Your ego will tell you that every conflict is an opportunity to prove yourself. Your ego is a liar. The real test is walking away when you don't have to prove anything. The real test is staying calm when someone tries to provoke you. The real test is protecting the people you love without becoming the thing you're protecting them from. He paused, looking at the rows of attentive faces. That day at the expo, I could have hurt Mr. Crane. I knew a dozen ways to end that match in seconds, but I didn't, because hurting him wasn't the point. The point was showing him and showing myself that strength doesn't have to be cruel, that skill doesn't have to humiliate, that winning doesn't require destroying the other person. The back of the room, Harrison Crane wiped his eyes and didn't bother to hide it. A year later, the community center on 4th Street got a renovation. New mats, new lighting, new equipment. The funding came from an anonymous donor, but everyone knew whose signature was on the check. Crane never put his name on it because, as he told Alex, some gifts don't need a receipt. Alex kept working his maintenance job. He never asked for money, and Crane never offered it in a way that felt like charity. Instead, Crane set up a scholarship fund in Sarah's name, a quiet trust that would cover Lily's education all the way through college. When Alex tried to refuse, Crane said, "It's not for you, it's for the future sensei who used to correct my shoulders." Alex couldn't argue with that. Lily grew. She started training with her father in the mornings, learning the same principles he had once used in combat zones, now softened into a practice of mindfulness and movement. She was good, better than good. She had her father's natural feel for connection and her mother's fierce, gentle heart, and every Saturday morning, the billionaire and the single father still met in the community center gym. Sometimes they trained. Sometimes they just sat on the steps afterward, drinking coffee from paper cups, talking about nothing and everything. The world outside was still loud and complicated, but in those Saturday hours, there was a kind of peace that neither man had expected to find. One morning, as they cooled down after a session, Crane said, "I've been thinking about what you said the first time we sparred, that I'd stopped learning. I didn't really understand it then, but I think I do now." Alex took a sip of his coffee. "What do you understand? That learning isn't about accumulating techniques. It's about staying open, staying humble, being willing to be a beginner again every single day." He looked at Alex. "You taught me that and I'm grateful." Alex didn't say anything. He just nodded, and the two men sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning sun climb over the rooftops. In the parking lot, Lily was teaching one of the neighborhood kids how to do a forward roll. Her laughter floated through the air, bright and free. Alex listened to it, and in that sound he heard everything he had ever fought for, everything he had ever tried to protect. He was a single father. He was a maintenance worker. He was nobody, and he was the richest man in the world. Life lesson: true strength is not found in titles, trophies, or the ability to dominate others. It's found in the quiet discipline of knowing when to act, when to remain still, and when to extend a hand instead of a fist. The most powerful people in the world are often the ones you never notice. The humble, the patient, the ones who have learned through hardship that character matters more than recognition. Never underestimate someone based on their appearance, and never let success convince you that you have nothing left to learn. Every person you meet carries a story, and sometimes the person you overlook is the one who can teach you the most. Call to action if this story moved you. Please share it with someone who needs to hear that quiet strength still matters in this world. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people with extraordinary hearts, and remember, the next time you meet someone the world has overlooked, look a little closer. You might just find a teacher.